I get the privilege today of sitting with Mr. Roger BelAir. And I got to tell you, I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. Thank you for being here. Let's just start that way, okay?
Greg, it's great to see you. It's been many years.
It's been a lot of years.
But you're supposed to age like the rest of us.
You
look just the same.
You haven't seen me on the court yet. I'm so fascinated to do this, and by explanation of sort of the phrase that this podcast will start with, the phrase I came up with is just the next chapter, is that I've known you, and that chapter has been driven in the world of business, and you with banking, mortgages, real estate, those sorts of topics and venues. And as this podcast will evolve, we'll see that in your, we'll call it retirement years from that, wow, there's a whole different chapter. And that's the exciting part of the reinvention of life and the openness for the reinvention, And so we're going to get there, and I'm really excited about that. But I want to go back a little different order of service, but I want to go back to when you and I met. And sort of starting there, then I want to back up even further, because then I got to know you, but I still want to go back further than that. But let's start with when we met, because that all by itself is, the Ice Age ago. It seems
over
like
30 years ago. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just really amazing.
It is.
And I think it was when you were given a class and on real estate up at the university. I think my brother was involved in that. Bless his heart.
Yeah.
And you helped him focus on real estate, which is a wonderful way to invest. But you need a mentor, you need to know what you're doing, and then you need the willingness to get involved and do something.
Yeah.
And you helped Randy, and he was he didn't start with much money, but he created a nice nest egg by himself because he worked hard and he had a vision and he had the knowledge to do it.
Yeah. Those years seem like 1,000 years ago, but I do remember that, and I remember Randy, and unfortunately he's gone on to a better life in heaven, and I'm sorry to know that now, but I really enjoyed my time with him, and that led to meeting you. And you had if I were to remember right, you had a building on Queen Anne Hill. I bet you I could almost drive to it, but I got involved in the transition you had out of that building, and I bet you I could drive to it though after all those years.
Wow. Well, I sold it 30 years ago, and you sold it for us. Yeah. And it was a wonderful building, but I had met the love of my life, and we moved in together, and there wasn't enough room for us in that place. So that's what happened. That was the transition.
And it's crazy that these are the details that are so amazing to me, is that I can remember the name of the guy that I found that wanted that building, and I can't remember last week. So how in the hell I can remember his name from 30 years ago, I don't know, but I can. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. But at that time, you were very, very established in the banking world. We're going to come back to that. We're just going to put that on hold. I want to hear you and Randy. Where were you raised? I want to hear about those early years. I want to hear about what went into forming your belief system. What environment? Your parents? What were your memories of being formed in your hard drive of your mind? Because you're not normal. And I'm really curious to hear.
You're not the first person that said I'm not normal.
Yeah, right. I'm sure I'm not. Compliment. I'm sure. And it is a compliment. But I'm real curious as to how extraordinary gets formed. So Tell me about that a little bit.
I'm going to share something with you that I haven't talked to many people about. I grew up in Eastern Washington, in Kennewick, small town, 10,000 people. And my folks owned a bakery. All right.
Really?
In a small town.
Wow.
But what I would do after grade school is I would walk from the grade school down to the shop, where my dad's working. And when I was down there, I'd, hang out and stuff. And my dad had a reputation with hobos, transients, who would ride the trains. They'd get off in Kennewick, and they'd tell each other that if you go to BelAir's bakery, you can work for an hour, and he'll give you food. So I would climb up on the flour sacks and talk to these guys. And they'd say things like, kid, stay in school. Kid, don't get involved in drugs. Kid, you don't want to end up like me.
Wow.
And so many of my lessons I learned from people that were homeless. And there was very few actually back then because, they would come to this particular location. But I compare that, Greg, with going to downtown Seattle now.
Right.
And what a change. But I have a real sensitivity in my heart for these people because I knew them back then.
But that helps explain even maybe a little bit where we're going and the heart that
maybe.
Yeah. Wow. And talk about an uncommon classroom.
Yeah, very much so. But the values that I learned from my folks were things like tell the truth.
Yeah.
All right. Just be yourself. And values like that I think the values are real important to all of us.
And they were entrepreneurs. They were running their own business.
Yeah, but it was a struggle. I mean, they worked very hard. My dad was very friendly and knew everybody in town, but he wasn't financially didn't do very well. I mean, it was a and most small businesses are like that. I mean, it's a grind.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are real gifted and make a lot of money, but many really struggle. And that's a topic of the conversation over the dinner table every night.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet seeing that alternative of, okay, here's a small business. You saw what went into that. Did that drive you toward wanting that, or drive you toward wanting what might be a bigger, less involved in every aspect structure?
I think what it did was it drove me in the direction I wanted a fair amount of financial success. And I certainly don't believe that money brings happiness, but what it does do is give you options. And there's a tremendous benefit of saying, I want to do this option as compared to doing that.
Right.
And so at a young age, I was fascinated by investments, about making money. Again, not for consumerism, but because I wanted options.
Right.
And that's really the way I've lived my life.
Right.
Even though I've been very blessed financially.
Yeah.
And could have a much higher lifestyle, but that's not important to me.
That's crazy. And so were you in Kennewick then all the way through high school in that area?
Yeah. And then graduated and went to Washington State University, hung around and got my MBA.
Right.
Didn't know what I wanted to do, so I bought a ticket, one-way ticket to Hawaii, and got a job as a bellhop.
Really? In Hawaii after a master's degree?
After a master's degree, yeah.
Like I said, you're not normal.
Yeah. Well,
so everybody, the lesson there is stay in school, get a master's, and then you too can bring luggage to a door.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I applied for the job, and the guy said, well, have you done this before? And I said to myself, how hard can it be? Yeah, I have a master's degree. So I said, oh, of course.
Of course I've done this.
Yeah. When I was in college, I worked out at the hotel. And I did, but that was a part-time different occupation. So he says, all right, we'll hire you. So they hired 22. It was a brand, Al Moana Hotel. It's still there in Waikiki. I mean, it's a landmark. They hired 22 bellhops. 20 of them were local guys because they wanted the local flavor and the local color, and 2 Caucasians for affirmative action.
You were
I was a token.
token Caucasian. We need blue eyes, Caucasian. You're in, right?
You mentioned that, but more than once I was asked, people come off the plane, oh, I'm so tired. I just flew in from Kansas. Are you full-blooded Hawaiian? And of course, the Hawaiian people are large, they're dark.
Right.
I'm Norwegian, and I said, well, no, I'm not.
Well, no.
Yeah. But isn't that funny?
This is hilarious. If he were here, and you, of course, know the name and the story of my history with A.B. Label. Mm-hmm. He's passed away quite a long time ago, but his start was a bellhop at a hotel at Harrison Hot Springs up here in Canada. And I just find it so interesting how roads, they're never predictable. And it seems like the most extraordinary destinations come from the most circuitous routes, the routes that you would never have thought would brought you here. But so Hawaii transitioned me from Hawaii into a life of investment and banking, and that's a from bellhop to banking. Walk me through that.
I came back, and the first thing I decided to be a stockbroker. And I spent 2 years doing that, was with a great education because you're selling. You're trying to gain new clients, but it wasn't right for me. I mean, I was stressed about how much money I was making of trying to get by, or if I have in a good month, about the next month. So I decided to make a change into the banking industry. And that worked out really well. I went to work for Seattle First National Bank, which was at that time the largest bank in the Pacific Northwest. I was there for 10 years. I had a very good career. And my last position, I was vice president and in charge of the head office branch for personal banking. So I moved up the organization quite rapidly.
Yeah.
But, and this is where I think you'll find what you'll find of interest. I was also an entrepreneur at the same time. And I was driven to have, as I said earlier, there's some financial success, but as a banker, you never make that much money. So I got involved in real estate. I started by buying property and fixing it up and reselling it, and then got into rentals. And then I evolved into buying discount mortgages. And you know what that is. A lot of times people would, back in that day, there'd be agreement between the buyer and the seller where the seller would accept monthly payments. Many times they were very happy doing that. But some of the time they wanted to liquidate that asset because they wanted to take a once-in-a-lifetime trip or medical reason or divorce. And if they go out and to try to sell that in the marketplace, is a very limited market. Who's going to buy it? Banks won't buy it. Most people don't understand it. So with a great deal of trepidation, I put my toe into that market. Worked out very well. I did it again and again and again.
Which led to writing a book.
Well, before that, it led to magazines like Money magazines or the New York Times Financial Tape. They're always looking for new, interesting stories. Money magazine approached me and said, "We're fascinated by what you do." My business partner, Nick Bryan, and I ended up being profiled on the cover story of Money magazine.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Robert Allen, no, I won't. There's no reason to go there. But anyway, so when that happened, Doubleday approached me and asked me to write a book on discount mortgages. And Robert Allen, who was a very successful real estate author at that time, he wrote the book Nothing Down, came out and with a quote that he felt that buying discount mortgages was the single best money-making idea that he knew of at that time. That went on our book. So that's the marketing aspect that you're so good at. That really helps sell that book. And so it sold very well.
Well, I have a copy of that book, and I have read it, and I think it's interesting that very few people really understand the world of notes and collateralized notes. Let's just start there. The understanding of how to reverse engineer a yield to buy a note would be like, now you're in a whole different planet, and you're down to like 1% of 1% that understand that world. And it's like anything, when you have really superior knowledge in something, you command the industry because very few people understand it, know it. Knowledge is powerful in a lot of ways. And I think it's really interesting that, just the chapter of being a stockbroker, even if it wasn't for you, boy, to get that Series 7 license is no piece of cake. You got to really study. You got to really study. And the value of understanding all financial vehicles really makes you a better investor entrepreneur. So in the world of note buying, was your purchasing of notes primarily notes that were collateralized by residential properties, or did you buy notes collateralized by bigger commercial assets?
Well, I think, first of all, what you just said is really insightful. But of course, I had the banking background, so that really helped me understand having, what's the asset backing this up if things go south, all right? And also being able to figure out how the yields work. So at what price should I buy this? And I had that knowledge, and but what I did was I applied that knowledge, and it worked out very, very well for us. All right.
Yeah.
So that financially I could really retire at the age of 37 or 38. All right.
Yeah.
So I went from, at the age of 30, paying back student loans, all right, of $35 a month, and basically no net worth at all, to in a few years being able to be financially independent.
Well, and again, this is everybody's goal. I've never run into anybody who say that's my goal, and they use this term that, boy, what I'm wanting in my life is I'm wanting passive income. And boy, there's something about that word passive that I just go to battle with, because becoming knowledgeable is not passive. It's deliberate. It's purposeful. It's you're not just falling into that. Great assets and finding great assets to purchase and invest in. Nothing passive about that either. The result may be somewhat passive, but the getting there is anything but passive. And you applied yourself in a big way.
That's right. I got involved in rental property a little bit, but rental property is excellent, but it didn't fit my personality. I had come from more of the perspective of being a banker and saying, well, here's the rules. Everybody plays by the rules. But if you don't, I have the hammer. All right. And in other words, if the payments don't come in, then I'm backed up by the collateral.
Right.
So it was a very good fit for me. And like I said, I was really driven to have financial success. But back then, and I even feel more so now, life's not about money. It's a vehicle that gives you options, and then use your time, because time's our most precious asset.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So how do we want to spend our time to do something that you really get some satisfaction in? Yeah. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that's sometimes I have people that I think really get that, and they look at the world of real estate and investment as, okay, I'm going to get very serious about this, but it's a means to an end. This is going to create this that's going to allow me to take my time, energy, and effort and devote it here. Right. And I love that idea. You may fall in love with it and do it forever on a certain level, but really, I believe that it can be just a vehicle that opens the door, which frees your time and gives you resources to really dedicate where you want to. It's a crime, Roger, that, for example, in my opinion, there's teachers out there that are amazing teachers, but they don't teach because they don't get paid enough teaching. Mm-hmm. But what if you didn't have to get paid to get to teach? You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Or coaches that aren't coaching because they're too busy working all day. You know, it can be a freedom piece that allows you to do what you're really called to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it takes a certain amount of internal thought of saying, what am I doing? Instead of living life on a treadmill of just saying, well, yesterday's yesterday and I'm doing the same thing today and I'll be doing it tomorrow, is to have a game plan of saying, well, what do I want to do? How do I want to live my life?
Right.
Yeah.
So give me your earliest thoughts in that department. There you're in Hawaii, you come back, you start into the investment world and stocks and banking. But what was there a bigger end game that you were moving toward?
No, well, I'll be the first one to say it sounds real glamorous going over to Hawaii. I was single. I lived with a couple other guys, and you wanted to get home early because otherwise you slept on the couch. You know, hell, that was the life. It was on Waikiki. It was a block away from Waikiki. But it was a real difficult time in my life because I didn't know exactly what I wanted. Occasionally somebody would say, you have a master's degree and you're carrying bags. Are you afraid of responsibility? And I was sensitive enough that I would internalize that and didn't know how to answer it. All right. So I wasn't extremely confident of my abilities, but I guess I'll say I was very naive. But I think most of us are when we're young. And it takes some time and some lessons to develop who we are and what do we want to do. And then say, well, here's what I really want to do. Now, how do I get there?
Right.
And how do I develop that path?
Right. Yeah. But it sounds like that happened between that 30 to 37, mark, or did
I think so. And I think that because at that time I was really driven, again, not toward consumerism, but having a degree of assets. And once I accomplished that, then I said, I don't need to work to put food on the table. Now it's more a matter of what's important. And just like when Doubleday asked me to write that book, I said, well, geez, I can't write a book. I mean, I don't even write my mother. But they said, well, if we can get you some help, you think all these athletes can write a book? All right? Yeah. So I sat down at what was called, you might remember, it's called a typewriter. Yeah. Oh, there's a P and there's a Q. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it looked pretty darn good, and they edited it a little bit, but the book sold well. And then they came to me and says, you're a former banker. There's so many people that have a trepidation of going into a bank and asking to borrow money. They don't know if they're playing a game or just what. Would you write a book for the business community on how to borrow money from a banker? That was the name of my next book. And that sold very well.
Yeah. But practical and needed. Like you say, financial literacy is really needed.
Yeah.
And those are excellent tools. Yeah. Did you enjoy the authoring process?
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. That industry has changed so much now. It's, but even at that time, Doubleday published my first book. The odds of a first-time author going with Doubleday were 10,000 to 1. All right.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Money Magazine, of course, I would have had no chance. But after my second book came out, I ran into a guy at the party, and we're talking. And I said, I just quoted your dad in my book, my banking book. He looks at me and he says, you did? My dad? I said, yeah. And he said, what's the name of your book? And I said, How to Borrow Money from a Banker. Well, this guy's name was Vince Lombardi Jr. And Vince said to me, you should talk to my agent. You should be giving speeches. You should speak at business conventions. And I never thought about doing that, But hey, that sounds kind of like fun. You mean you stand up for a half hour or an hour and, if they don't like what you say, well, let's look it up in the book, right? So I put together a speech, and I quickly learned it's a lot easier to find a new audience than it is a new speech. So from the American Restaurant Association to American Contractors Association, I tweak it a little bit based on the industry, but tell them what's in my book. So that was a lot of fun. And I have Vince to thank for that.
Yeah, Vince. I swear it. I was about 8 years old, and I think like every 8-year-old that loved football, we were all intimidated by Vince Lombardi. He just had that presence about him. But boy, talk about commanding respect, huh?
Yeah. And Vince Jr. and I, we're good friends. I mean, I don't see him too often because he doesn't live around here anymore, but we traveled together, and so I heard a lot of stories about them.
Yeah,
the coach Lombardi. And
see, once again, you don't have a normal life.
Yeah.
Wow. So your first, or your ability to, quote unquote, retire, which you've never stopped for a minute, but from banking into the next chapter, the next transition, because your life has had these transitions, it seems, these sections, happened really early, really young. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and so being that young with resources, is this when what I would call the extreme travel portion of life kicked in?
I think so. I don't know if you know the name Dale Turner. Do you know Dale?
I don't, huh?
Dale was a friend of mine. He wrote a column for the Seattle Times. He was a minister. I'd say of the top, everybody I've met, Dale's in the top 3 or 4. All right? He was a good friend of John Wooden's.
Really?
Martin Luther King.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Martin Luther King Jr. And Dale, he married Bill Gates. He married my wife and I. We had lunch one day, and he had mentioned he was here, he lived was in Australia and other places traveling. And I said to him, he was old. I mean, he was like 65 or something like that.
Right.
Really old.
Careful.
Or maybe 70. And I'm 77 now. All right. So I just kind of assumed, I was so young, that he did this after he retired. Mm-hmm. And so I said to him, Dale, did you do this after you retired? He said, no, Roger. He says, my wife and I got married later on in life. We were 30 years old. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage. Mm-hmm. And I was a minister starting out. So we sat down and we said, how do we want to live our life? Mm-hmm. We're not going to have a lot of money that we can have the big fancy boat and an airplane or whatever. And, she knew that. And so we decided the way we wanted to live our life is we wanted to invest in our experiences. Mm-hmm. And investing in our experiences for us meant travel. So we would take the kids out of school, maybe for a couple weeks or during the summertime, and we'd travel around the country. And you've never traveled, Roger, until you had 3 boys in the back seat. But we also, during the summers, would go to foreign places. Mm-hmm. And he says, it's maybe one of the most rewarding things I've ever done, because you learn not only about where you go, but when you do this, you learn so much about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And you realize that there are different ways of doing things, and many of them are better than the way that your little bubble does it. Mm-hmm. Because we all live in a little bubble. We know our friends and our acquaintances, and we're drawn to people like us with those type of values. And then it's kind of an ecosystem of, isn't this make sense? And doesn't that make sense?
Right. It's got to be reconciled within the bubble.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if they don't have those values, then we're not drawn to them necessarily.
Right.
But I've been to 61 different countries, and of course, some of them more than once. Right now, my wife's in France. But what a wonderful way to experience life.
Mm-hmm. You know, Roger, I had the privilege many, many years ago of interviewing you at Victory Studios for the Masters series, and there was a soundbite out of that interview when I asked you about your travel, and it's a soundbite, and I can quote it because I have many times. It says, "You said I travel because I might be wrong," and I think you just explained this so eloquently for everybody. But I'll tell you, the first time I heard that, that's what I call a deep ocean line. It's where you just got to go out and get lost in it and think about it deeply. This idea that our life is sort of like a menu, and that, okay, if you're born and raised in Seattle, and this is your climate, and this is the food choices, and this is the philosophy and the religion, and there's your menu. That's what you know. That's what you've seen. But that isn't the only page out of the life world menu. And, you know, you explained it to me that when you travel, you come back and your own personal menu gets adapted based on your own reconciliation, what you've now seen. You incorporate certain things. You process and become like the greatest hits of what you've seen. You process it, and it made a lot of sense to me, like in the biggest way. And although I haven't traveled nearly as much as you, I look at it as much like your mentor said, this collaboration, or this vault of experiences to draw from. I think we get this is how it's done.
Righteous.
Yes.
Yeah, righteous. I have the answer. Here's what it is. And it's
righteous. That's
it's opinions without knowledge.
Opinions without knowledge.
And I like to say, and it's kind of a humorous twist, that there's some things a virgin will never understand, right? You know, you have to have the experience. You have to be there, and they say, now I get it.
Right.
And travel for me has been such an education. And it ties in a sense with that money, because if I hadn't had a few dollars, I wouldn't have been able to travel.
Right.
And there's a lot of people, like my folks didn't travel much. They would have loved it. But, and I told you about them, you know, they had modest means.
Right. It's where the two come together.
Yeah. And one can lead to the other. Yeah.
I recently listened to a lecture, just a small clip of the lecture, maybe 5 minutes of a lecture. Jensen Huang gave a lecture to Stanford business graduates. And the lecture centered around that. His soundbite in that lecture is that I wish for you all an ample dose of pain and suffering, because without this, success will elude you. And boy, I'll tell you, it's another deep ocean thought, but the way the two tie in my mind, is that when you travel to the way you travel, you're automatically out of a comfort zone. You're not in control. A language is different, culture is different, everything's different. And so your righteousness, it just goes away. You now are forced to be open to an environment that you've walked into. Well, adversity, in one sense, is that same kind of environment. And adversity creates empathy and understanding. And adversity creates that I now know on a different way than I did before, because I wouldn't have known had I not gone through this. I've had people sit in this chair that have, been this close to dying from cancer or had full heart replacement, complete replacements, and where you don't know if tomorrow's coming. And all of a sudden, okay, you made it, but the world is never going to look the same again. Mm-hmm. And that sense of vulnerability and humility and all of those qualities that come out of getting out of your bubble. Mm-hmm. Adversity does it. Mm-hmm. Travel does it. Why are we so adverse to that idea of getting out of our bubble? Why are we so righteous?
Boy, not all cultures are that way. You go to India, and I'll use that country as an example, and so many people have absolutely nothing. And it's very common to run into people without even shoes. And yet you look at their faces, and a very high percentage have a smile on their face. And I'm not the first person to say this, is they're much happier over there than they are in this country. Mother Teresa, when she came over here the first time, said, "This is one of the saddest places I've ever seen." But I believe an awful lot of us in this country we're so caught up in image, so caught up in trying to impress other people, so caught up in trying to act like we have it all. And my friend Vince has a great phrase, which is, what we do is we compare other people's outsides with our insides. And we see them and they, quote, have it all, and they try to put on this facade of how wonderful their life is. And then what we do is we internalize it by making comparison. Charlie Munger, who is a Warren Buffett's partner, said, what makes the world go around isn't greed, it's envy. All right? Because we see other people and we envy them, and so we want that or more. And he was talking about that in comparison to these CEOs that have these enormous salaries and multi-million. But what one CEO wants to do is make more than the next one. And you look at a great example that I heard about a couple of days ago, Elon Musk. He wants 56 billion.
Right. Yeah.
Compensation.
Yep.
Yeah. How much is enough?
How much is enough?
Yeah.
I sat with one of my clients in their beautiful home in Scottsdale, like over the top beautiful. 20,000 feet of beautiful. On his patio, looking up on top of the hill, and I said, "What are they building up there? Is that a resort?" "No, it's one guy's house." One guy's house? That's one guy's house. How big is that? He said, "Just a little bit bigger than Bill Gates' house." Because that's the only instructions evidently he gave to the architect. Is, "I just want it bigger than Bill Gates' house." So it's like 80-some thousand square feet. And you go, interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's such a great example, because you ask people what they want and the answer comes back, they want more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this travel, this perspective, this philosophy, I mean, to me, what has always distinguished you, Roger, is being so different, because, resume and credential is one thing, but quite honestly, it in some ways it doesn't match your demeanor. You're soulful. You're a philosopher, and so it doesn't surprise me, but it fascinates me how this latest transition into like, if we were to stop this right now and said, okay, if you've known nothing of Roger BelAir, what's the next chapter look like? I think you could give people a million guesses and they wouldn't get it. But I'm wanting you to because I feel the stage of your heart and your philosophy has been set. And I want to use that as a segue into what has taken you away in this last many years of your life that has just got all kinds of momentum. I want you to take it from there and transition from there.
Well, you never know about life, but what's really important is being open. Mm-hmm. And for the last 14 years, what I've done and accomplished and what's on the horizon is much more satisfying than anything else I previously did. I'll start by saying that.
Yeah, amazing.
And so I had a very good quality of life. I was, I did some professional speaking, but I was reaching the point where I'd kind of been there and done that. Mm-hmm. And somebody who says they like travel doesn't travel that much, because if you're living out of a suitcase and staying in hotel rooms, the novelty's worn off. Mm-hmm. And so I was married at the time. We got married in 1990. And my wife and I were talking about things to do. And one day I ended up at the gym and I was exposed to this game called pickleball. Knew nothing about it. It's a combination of ping pong and tennis and badminton. I played it, liked it very much, and went home and I said, I think here's something we could enjoy together. All right. Mm-hmm. So we started doing that. And then I ended up finding the game was created in 1965 over on Bainbridge Island. And I ended up meeting one of the three founders' son, and that led to being introduced to the founder. And more I got exposed to this, I said, I can teach this. I mean, I'm a professional speaker by background. It's a very simple game. And besides, I like to tell people what to do. So I started teaching it. And then one of the three of the founder that I knew, Barney McCallum, we ended up being pretty good friends. All right. And he was in a retirement community, and I'd see him once a month. So I'm teaching it locally here in Edmonds, and my wife and I, we have a routine where every Sunday night we watch 60 Minutes. They had a segment, Leslie Stahl did, on Sheriff Tom Dart, who does his best to run Cook County Jail in Chicago. Now, as you can imagine, that's a thankless job. No matter what you do, you're criticized. Mm-hmm. They got 70 major gangs in Chicago. They have 100,000 gang members. They outnumber the cops 10-1. It's just amazing. They average 2 homicides a night, if you can believe it. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching this segment, and the detainees, the guys who are waiting in front of the judge, they're playing cards, they're watching TV. I said to my wife, they should be playing pickleball. They get exercise. They could learn some life skills like thinking about mistakes, thinking about consequences, learning about teamwork. And she gives me a kind of a polite nod. We've been married for a while.
Right. I'm going to bed now, Roger.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep thinking on that.
Will you hold it down? I'm trying to watch this. And so a couple of minutes later, I said, here's what's going to happen. I said, I'm going to write Sheriff Dart a letter. I'm going to tell him exactly what I think. A matter of fact, I'll go back there on my own dime. I'll bring all the equipment, and I'll teach those guys pickleball. The next day, I sat down and wrote a letter. Now, this was 2017, maybe. And Sheriff Tom Dart, like most of the rest of the country at that time, had not heard about pickleball. He hears from a lot of kooks, puts a letter on the side of his desk. But that night, Greg, I understand that he's got 2 or 3 kids sitting around the dinner table and said, I got this letter from this guy out in Seattle. something about balls and pickles. And I don't know if he's a kook or not. His 10-year-old daughter puts her hands on her hip and says, Dad, I'll tell you about pickleball.
Really?
Okay. So if it hadn't been for that 10-year-old, we wouldn't be sitting here talking today. Right?
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
So he gets the letter off the desk and he calls you.
Well, somebody called me, one of the subordinates.
Yeah. Wow. And this led to you taking a trip.
Yeah. So I go back to Chicago. All right. And Chicago's a big town.
Yeah.
I take an Uber to Cook County Jail. I get out and I look around. I cannot believe the size of it.
Mm-hmm.
Cook County Jail is the size of 72 football fields.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely huge.
Hmm.
My heart's in my throat. I go through clearance, and all of a sudden I'm in a room. 25 guys. They've all been charged with murder or attempted murder. And I thought I'd just start by giving them a little background about the sport, about how pickleball was founded in Seattle. It's kind of a combination of ping pong and tennis, and well, nobody's paying any attention. You know, arms across, they're walking around the room. They're totally bored. And oh man, I said to myself, this is not working. I mean, I didn't know if I thought of my wife. I thought of my dog. I didn't know if I was going to be on a plane back to Seattle that night.
Right.
And prisons and jails are very intimidating places.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's cold. There aren't windows in the room and that type of thing. I didn't know what to do, so I said, "Well, let's go out the courts." I would say, Greg, within 15 minutes, they turned into third graders on a playground. They got this plastic ball and they're laughing and they're giggling and they're trying to hit it over the net. And they went from not paying any attention to what I had to say to listen to every single word. And in a matter of 3 or 4 hours, I turned from OG, that sounds from old guy,
mm-hmm.
to either bro or dude.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I was there a week teaching, and it was an incredible experience. They loved it. I've been to Chicago 3 times. The last time I was there, a sports reporter for USA Today was there. And Scott was there to write a story for the sports page on this new activity they're doing. He calls me up a couple of days later and says, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's not going to run on the sports page." And my heart dropped. I'm thinking to myself, why did they kill the story? I mean, I thought it was a good story. I told my nosy neighbor, I told the guys at the gym, I'm going to have an egg on my face. I was all excited. The mind works very fast. And so these are all the thoughts, right? Right. And then he kind of giggled. He says, "Well, the editors read the story and they're going to run it on the front page. Front page of USA Today on Friday, the day with the most circulation." All right. Well, like the Money Magazine piece that we talked about earlier, how that changed my life.
Yeah.
So did this article on the front page of USA Today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I can only imagine.
Yeah. And anybody who's watching this or listening to it, they can pull the article up online. And I want to point out a couple things about it because, they interviewed the different inmates and whatever. But the 2 most important aspects of this article is one is from the Jim Edmondson, who was the head of athletics, and he says, disciplinary problems are down. Mm-hmm. Guys want to play so much that they behave themselves. And if they get into trouble, they can't play pickleball. Well, how wonderful is that?
Right. Motivation.
What a way to motivate people with a carrot rather than a stick.
Right.
Yeah. That is so simple that if you can get them to behave themselves and be open to getting the exercise and interactions. But even more important than that, there's a picture of me sitting on the bench with a kid. Well, he's a kid to me. He's probably 30. And he's saying, as this picture's taken, he says, look out there in the courts. Well, God, I look out there and I see some guys hitting the ball and some guys trying to hit the ball. And he said, you don't understand. You're from Seattle. You got opposite gang members out there playing with and against each other. Before pickleball, some of them wouldn't even talk to each other. The same guys.
Right. Well, they'd hate each other for no reason.
That's because they're opposite gangs.
Right.
By definition.
Right.
Yeah. Because, there's 2 homicides on average per night in Chicago, Cook County. Most of that is gang-on-gang violence. Yeah.
Yeah. And here they're laughing.
They're
partnering.
They're giving each other high fives.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the start of the journey.
Wow. That motivated you it took that up a whole level for you too, because you saw the purpose of this in action now.
Well, sure. You see the results and they're incredible results. And I didn't expect something like that.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to say I was naive. I think it was a nice gesture for me to write the letter in the first place, but I didn't know exactly what, I'd never been inside of a jail before. I mean, close I ever came is I got my car towed once because it was illegally parked. I mean, I didn't know anything about criminal justice system.
Right.
So,
this is really, really interesting.
But that opened the door.
Yeah.
That was the paddle inside the door that opened it. And the journey's been really upward since then.
And so what is the process involved with bringing this sport, a court, the equipment, the knowledge around it? You've taken this now to not just Cook County Jail in Chicago, but all over the place. What's that process look like now? What's the momentum, and how do you manage the momentum of this?
Well, it's all been kind of the journey. It's a very simple game. You can take a gymnasium and put down painter's tape, all right, and get 3 courts. Portable nets are less than $100 each. Paddles can be anywhere from $10 each, wooden paddles up. You can pay $300 if you want for a paddle. It's still going to work the same. Balls are $1 a piece. All right, so you got the logistics of getting that inside. But what's more important than that is, do you get the offer to come in?
Right.
All right.
Right.
So when I get an article like that one, I don't know if you're familiar with the term Rikers Island out in New York City, but they have 100,000 men and women, mostly men, of course, that flow through there every year. They reached out to me. They said, well, if that worked in Chicago, maybe it can work here. Will you come back and teach the game, which to our people waiting to go in front of the judge? I did. After I left, the deputy commissioner ordered 20 sets of pickleball equipment for 20 courts.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked.
Right.
I came out back to Washington State. I went to Walla Walla and other prisons, 3 or 4 prisons in our state. I went down to California, Corcoran, where Charles Manson spent some time. Same results, all right. But then COVID hit. Well, you know how COVID impacted your life, all right, and the life of your friends. Well, you can imagine on the inside, you can't have social distancing,
Right.
They just pretty much lock the guys in cages.
Right.
Right. Because they're short-staffed. The staff quits. They don't want to be in that type of environment. But once 22 hit, and COVID was more in the rearview mirror, and early 23, I heard from Florida, Department of Corrections. Florida has the 3rd largest inmate population of any state. Will you come down here? I went down there and spent a week. Same type of results. The Washington Post found out I was going down there, and they sent a photographer and a reporter for several days to follow me around. Major story. And it just keeps growing.
Right.
I came back, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I get an email from the warden at San Quentin, probably the most notorious prison in the country. San Quentin had more people on death row than any other facility in the Western Hemisphere. He said, Roger, can we have a video call tomorrow or whenever it's convenient? I said, sure. So the next day we set one up with him and a couple of his lieutenants. And Greg, I said to him, well, Warden, let me just tell you about some of the benefits of pickleball on the inside. He goes, I've done my homework. When can you be here?
Right. You had me at hello.
Yeah.
But I look at it from their perspective. And prisons are dangerous places, not just for the inmates, but for people who work there. They're dangerous.
They are.
And they're looking at this as this is changing the culture. It's a sociological impact that's happening that is changing the entire culture of the prison, changing the culture of jails, bringing hope and enthusiasm where there is none. I just think it's probably yet to be seen. The book on this is yet to be written, but you get this feel of this is psychology, it's sociology, it's fitness, it's cross-cultural, it's all of these things like in one blender that are happening from an idea that got ratified by a 10-year-old that started this ball rolling.
Well, and I got a great story that ties in exactly to what you're saying. So,
yeah.
So I agreed to go up to Folsom, and I'm dealing with an individual coordinating all this. And I said, what about the idea? I'm just brainstorming here of maybe having some of your staff participate with the inmates. Well, and not only that, but what about even the warden? Would the warden be interested in learning a fun new game? And the answer came back to me. It said, Roger, this is San Quentin. We've been around for 170 years.
Yeah.
Staff doesn't participate in something like that. And the warden, no thank you. That won't happen. So I waited a couple of days. I had the warden's cell phone number. I gave him a call, and I said, I'm really excited about coming up there. And what we've done in some other facilities is we've got the staff to participate, and it's worked out pretty darn well. And I don't know if he'd be open to that at all. And he thought and didn't really answer. He said, well, that's not normally the protocol that we do. And I laughed and I said, well, Warden, I think you'd look pretty good in shorts out there. What about you? He just laughed and he says, well, Roger, this has been fun talking to you, but yet the day I showed up, the warden had his shorts on and he was out on the court.
Wow.
Staff was participating.
Wow.
The inmates, San Quentin is a very well-known facility. The inmates have a podcast. And it's called Uncuffed. And if you Google it, you can pull it up. They did a piece on the day pickleball was introduced. Some of those comments were, I never thought I'd see the warden and staff members out on the court. It was mind-blowing. Yeah. Maybe this was a day that changed San Quentin.
Yeah.
One comment after another like that.
Right.
And that's continued to happen down there at San Quentin. They're having a tournament, I think, next week that involves both staff and inmates. All right. The warden is so excited about the positive benefits. I got a letter from him that he's even building a additional court outside the walls so the staff can play before and after work.
Wow.
I went up to,
Amazing.
Folsom heard about this at San Quentin. A documentary is being made about my life and my involvement. And I have a picture, and it's two people on one side of the net and two people on the other. You have the warden over here, you have the assistant, and you have two people that are in life for murder on the other side. They're giving each other a high five.
Right. Now that's a framer right there.
Sure. And also that's the first time in 140 years this happened at Folsom.
Right. What's running through my head, Roger, is that there's this, I don't know who said it, but the phrase is, everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Boy.
Meaning that warden and staff and prisoners in for murder, okay, sure, there's different things going on in their life, but they're both humans, and they're both struggling in some way with something. It's the human condition. And it seems that what's happening is it's just like that picture where they're across from each other on the court. It just brings it to here, and now we're closer to the same, and empathy and solution thinking and collaboration of the most unlikely suspects oftentimes leads to something that nobody's ever thought of. And then it becomes the new way or a new way of doing things. Something that's gone on forever and has not really changed in structure from the day that place was open.
Absolutely. And not only that, but see, 95% of all inmates are eventually released back into society.
Right.
95%. So if we can make them better people on the inside, it's better for all of us once they get out. Right?
Yeah.
As long as we're talking about this, I want to share another story with you because I think that you'll particularly like this. Pickleball, and anybody who listens to this, I really encourage you to give it a try. I mean, it's, you've tried it. You know how much fun it is. I was talking to a reporter recently from the Boston Globe, and he says it's the fastest growing sport in the history of America. All right? Okay. Well, there's reason for that. It's, easy to learn, on the joints, fun, social, etc. But it's very, it's a game that you can pick up after breakfast, and by lunchtime, you're pretty good. That's not true of most sports. I mean, I've been trying to learn golf for 40 years, right? Okay?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So there's only three basic rules, which I don't need to explain. But when I go inside, I tell the guys there's four basic rules. Teach them the three basic rules of how to score, or three basic rules on how to score. And then we play a abbreviated game. And then I look at the guys and say, well, how many rules are there? And some guys say 3, and somebody said, well, wait a minute. No, you said 4. I said, what's the fourth rule? Well, they're all looking around,
right,
because they haven't been told. But they're giddy. I mean, they're the third graders, they're so excited. All right. And so I say to them, I said, all right, well, we just finished a game. So we have the winners and we have the silver place, who came in second, right? And we have a group hug. Freeze. They went from being they heard what I said, but this is prison,
right?
And this old white guy said a group hug.
A group hug
is the fourth rule. Yeah. And part of the reason I do that is I enjoy the reaction on their faces so much.
Right. It's like a joke you've told 100 times.
Yeah. But, once in a while, maybe one guy out of 20 will come. All right. So, but anyway, that's what happens. So then what I do is I go up to the net. I put my paddle up. I encourage them to come in.
Yeah.
We tap paddles. And I said, guys, in pickleball, that's called a group hug.
Yeah.
All right.
Take the pressure off. Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But, what it is, the same as a nice game. When I teach, I've taught 4,000 people. When I teach the game on the outside, it's, it's just nice game. But on the inside.
Yeah.
And so I can guarantee you right now, there's people playing, right this minute, there's people playing in prisons. And after the game's over, they're going to say, group hug everybody.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Roger, way back when, Whitman said, the powerful play goes on and you can contribute a verse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the challenge piece of this story, what I want to be the challenge piece of this story is, what's the unlikely verse that hasn't been delivered? What brought that thought to your head when watching the Cook County Jail documentary on 60 Minutes? What brought that head? How did these two pieces, pickleball and jails, go together? The thought that nobody's ever thought. The verse that you're delivering now came from a thought that nobody ever thought of. Like, this and this could go well together. This could actually do something. And I'm challenged by that very philosophical notion that we all have a thought that hasn't been thought. We have a verse that hasn't been delivered. And when they are, it can change everything.
Mm-hmm.
It can change everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this has just been so challenging. My brain is like spinning with that idea of the most unlikely thoughts, ingredients in a blender that nobody would put them in the same blender. Prison and pickleball? Come on. And yet, as it plays out and as they merge, the benefit is just so obvious.
Sure.
Why hasn't it been explored before? What else is like that hasn't come out? I just think that it also speaks to your openness around you allowing an openness of your mind to think about things. Be open to the thoughts that come to your head. It's a little bit maybe this travel experience of just experiencing a culture, not going in with this is the way it's done, not with this righteous, here's the way it's got to be, but how do you do it here? I'm open to learn. I'm open to experience. Those are important aspects of this story.
I would say I'm an outside the box thinker.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And something I believe in is being uncopyable. In other words, don't do the same thing everybody else does because everybody does it. Mm-hmm. Go down your own path and see where it leads, because that's where the joy and the excitement comes from. Mm-hmm. In our society, the word smart is generally, I think, used with somebody who gets high grades. Mm-hmm. All right? Mm-hmm. Geez, they're a 4-point student or whatever. Well, the academic environment, we very definitely need it. But if you think about it, it's really a matter of memorization and then regurgitation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In other words, getting the information out of the textbook and then giving it back. Mm-hmm. Where creative type people, or maybe outside the box type thinking, doesn't necessarily get those high grades. Mm-hmm. They might be, there's an old expression, the A students end up working for the B and C students. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was an unconventional thought. It's been a journey I had never expected.
Right.
But I'm particularly excited about where it's going. Mm-hmm. Because what's happened the last couple of years is people have reached out to me and says, I know your story. I'm very impressed. I got a prison down the road, and I want to do the same thing that you're doing because I love pickleball. Will you be my mentor? I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit that we're putting together. Mm-hmm. I'm right now mentoring about 36 people around the country about going on the inside. They're having success. All right.
Awesome.
But I was thinking just a couple of days ago about where's this going to end up? And the most popular sport on the inside is basketball. And there's reasons for that. The guys end up playing it on the streets, many of them, when they were growing up.
Right.
But basketball is dominated by the young, the tall, the athletic, and everybody else sits on the sidelines. By comparison, pickleball can be played by a 10-year-old and a 90-year-old. All right. It's easy to learn. You can learn it in a couple hours. It's fun. It's much more social. And basketball on the inside, there's so many injuries because it's such an aggressive sport. That some places, they want to outlaw it. What's the word I'm thinking? Outlaw it. But pickleball, there's very few injuries. 25-year-olds fall down, they just get back up. So more than one person on the inside has told me, we think eventually pickleball is going to be the number one sport played in prisons. And that absolutely, I believe, is going to happen. I just can't tell you how fast that's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see the sport as a whole, as you already referenced. I mean, huge facilities going up and pickleball leagues and lots of family co-ed type tournament type stuff. And, I can see the aspects of that having a great effect on the outside. But I think that the sociological dynamic of how it's changing the culture of the prison.
Well, Greg, once you listen to that Uncuffed podcast, you'll really feel it.
Yeah.
Because you can feel the emotion in the guys' voices that have been in the inside for many years. The recidivism in our country is close to 70%. In Norway, it's about 20%. Now, Newsom is saying, we need to do a better job. So he's studying the Norway system and trying to implement some of what they do into our country, into California. And they call it the California way. And Norway focuses on what they call, we want to make these people normal. We want them to adjust to our society so they fit in. Traditionally, the system in our country has been, you did something wrong, you're going to pay for it, you're going to be penalized, and if you do it again, you're going to get a lot more penalty. All right, so we end up with a 70% recidivism rate.
Right.
And a shocking statistic is after guys get out, and women, a year later, half of them are still unemployed. They believe there's 3 things that need to happen for somebody to get out and stay out. Now, number 1, they need income. And this is information came from me from the headquarters of California Department of Corrections. They need income. They need support. Normally support, you think of family. And the third thing they need is community. Bingo. That's where they anticipate pickleball can play such a big role.
Right.
The guy can grab a racket, go down to the local courts, make new friends,
right,
new relationships.
Yep.
That's the community.
And he's got some time too, perhaps inside, to actually become fairly accomplished in the sport. I mean, if you love it, you have the time to practice, to get better. And so he'd fit into that community very quickly.
But the skill level's not that important. You can always find people, whether you just took a lesson yesterday or you've been playing for years or whatever. The skill level's not that important. It's a matter of being at your level.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
The founder told me pickleball is the most social sport ever created. And I thought about that, and I said, well, tell me more. And he said, well, what you do is you show up the courts normally by yourself. You go out on the courts, you have a game for 12 or 15 minutes, and then you exit and you come over the sidelines. Well, while you're on the sidelines, you have all these conversations. You get to know people on a first-name basis. Next time you go to the courts, some of those people are still there.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things you really have to experience before you understand it. But pickleball players I know, almost to a person, say they end up with an additional group of friends. They have something in common. And it's not even a matter of knowing their last name. And then after a while, maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
But you form this whole sense of community as compared to what goes on in 2024, which are people spending so much time looking at their phone.
Right.
So that's what's driving this sport, why it's the most popular sport growing in the history of America.
That's
the social aspect.
Well, it's awesome, Roger, that it's what a contribution. And it sounds as though managing with this mentorship program you have, managing the growth and the interest in bringing this in, you've figured out a way to, you can only be in one place at one time. Yeah. So it sounds as though that is helping with the growth aspect of bringing this in.
Yeah. I have to. I mean, it's a matter of, it's the next chapter. All right.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for me to fly to Montana to teach at a small prison. I mean, with all due respect to that site, is that the best use of my time?
Right.
All right. Or being on a podcast like this, or mentoring people, and I was doing that first thing this morning, is a way that the message and the benefits to all can be spread much further and much faster.
Yeah. And from a funding standpoint, they're taking existing facilities and just kind of making them a multi-purpose or converting them for the sport. Are there any new facilities being built that you know of at correctional facilities where they've said, "Wait, we really want a dozen pickleball courts here. We're going to build a facility." Is there any funding for that kind of thing?
Well, I think not really to my knowledge, but pickleball can be played. All you need is a hard surface. You can do it in an airplane hangar, right?
Right.
You can put down temporary lines or permanent lines with either paint or chalk, kids chalk or whatever. All the prisons have what's called a yard, where they kind of send guys out during the day, and they have certainly basketball courts out there, and it's very easy to put courts, pickleball courts, and the courts are portable. So there's just very, very strong demand on the inside, and again, it's so inclusive. All right, and the benefits. When you can get people to behave themselves, speak for themselves. So,
well, I think there's some irony here. You first got this idea watching 60 Minutes about the Cook County Jail, and that spurred an idea that got through a 10-year-old's ratification, and off we
stamp
go.
Of approval.
Right. But I think it would be really interesting if this story came full circle to, in the future, have you showcased on 60 Minutes with the same person that did the Cook County Jail story, saying, "Hey, here's a real interesting twist on a story we did way back when that inspired this guy that got ratified by her, who's now 30 years old." Wouldn't that be something? I'm planting a seed here for 60-minute people to pay attention here, because that's got to be a sellout on the airwaves. Because ideas spur ideas. And yet at the heart of it, you're watching this story about Cook County Jail with empathy, with concern, with this sense of there's got to be something to be done. Hey, what about pickleball in there?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it all started.
Mm-hmm.
And it's created a whole next chapter of your life that you've said is the most satisfying chapter so far with your interesting endeavors and travels. I think that all by itself is incredibly inspiring because you said you're 77. You know, Roger, I don't need to tell you, most 77 years old aren't traveling around the country in bringing pickleball to prisons.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, they
probably think I'm giving group hugs. Yeah.
Right. I just think it's inspiring that your tail's wagging like a young springer on pheasant hunting day. You know, I mean, I can see it. You're excited about where this is going, and you're on task, and you're on calls and podcasts and articles, and you're on task versus so many in quote retirement just seem to just do nothing. And I don't know, I'm inspired by that as well as the story itself.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. It's awesome, man. This is the bow I'm going to put on this is the challenge of chapters, of reinvention, of what are the thoughts you haven't thought. That's the considered challenge, because there isn't anybody that's going to watch this that isn't going to take a long walk and go, wow, what's my version of that? And what should I be thinking that I haven't thought of? What is the passion that I need to bring to life? Thank you for doing that. Sincerely.
It's been wonderful.
It has been an awesome time. How do people correctly and responsibly connect with you? What would be the best vehicle you would like people to reach out to you, to comment, connect, ask questions?
Yeah, great. I'd love to give my email address if I can.
Yeah.
Which is BelAir with 2 R's on the end. So it's BelAir at gmail.com. And I hear frequently from somebody that says, like I said earlier, who wants to do the same thing in their local community.
Yeah.
And people a lot of pickleball players are very passionate about the sport, and that aspect is growing very rapidly. But if they have other questions, they can just reach out to me too.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thank you again.
Well, thank you.
Young man. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to this podcast. And until the next one, God bless you.